he would want to make sure his children had plenty of wealth, so he would end up using some of the wealth of the church to help raise his family and so on. So the church outlawed monks and nuns and priests being married, right? So that they couldn't have children. Or if they did, they were out of wedlock, so you wouldn't have any obligations to them, right? And so you ended up then with the church being able to accumulate more wealth as they did. So that's kind of interesting as well. There's another famous one who wasn't a monk initially, but he eventually became one.
A distant past, a holy place, a time when a child of the country and a scholar of the cloth would light a fire to all that was forbidden.
If I were to take a woman, I would be spitting in the face of God. You're a man like other men.
You find it difficult to repent of this sin?
Yes, sir.
Why?
I love you, Father. You'll destroy each other, you know that, don't you?
What the devoted worshipped, they defied.
The challenge is established knowledge.
What the laws denied, they took.
Rummaging open his rubbing blood.
What heaven promised, they stole.
It is the time of judgment.
This isn't the only blood that will flow.
Sorry. Oh dear. Sorry. Trigger warning. Trigger warning.
Forgive them, Father.
It's a European film, so
Stealing heaven.
but it's about Abelard and Heloise. He was a teacher. He wasn't a monk, but he was teaching at the University of Paris, and he was especially famous for his logic teaching and his argument against universals was especially important. And it being expensive to live in Paris, a baron offered him a place in his castle for free, provided that in his spare time he would teach the baron's ward, Heloise. Well, it turned out that he not only taught her logic and theology, but he also fell in love with her, etc. So they ended up lovers. And the trouble was he couldn't get married and still keep his teaching job, and he didn't have any other kind of life. And so he didn't marry her. And the baron, being so upset that he was not marrying his ward, he instead had 4 henchmen come, because he stayed in the castle, he didn't leave, and so there 4 henchmen came to his bedroom at night and removed a certain part of his body that the baron was offended by. I guess you can imagine which part that was. And after that, he decided he might as well become a monk. And so he did become a monk and went to a monastery in Normandy. And Heloise became a nun after she gave birth to their child, who they named Astrolabe. Anybody know what an astrolabe is? It's an instrument they used to use in order to try to sail and find the places they were going to. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, an astrolabe. So that's kind of silly, but in any case, so But what's neat about them is the two of them continue to write letters to one another. And those letters are in our library. So if you're interested in the letters between Abelard and Heloise, you can read those and see what life was like in the Middle Ages. So that's kind of neat. But the one that's going to be most important for us at the end of the Middle Ages is Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas is going to be a student of Albertus Magnus. And Albertus Magnus is an Aristotelian, because by this time, either from the Crusades that have gone into the Middle East and monks meeting with the wise people there and so on, or through the universities in Spain, the works of Aristotle have come back into Northern Europe. And one of the philosophers that helped this was Moses ben Maimon, or otherwise known as Maimonides. And I remember when I talked about Moses and the idea of the monotheistic religion, I mentioned the phrase that from Moses to Moses there was no one like Moses. This is the second Moses. And he was a scholar originally from Spain, but when Spain was completely taken over by the Christians, the Jewish people either had to convert or die or leave, and his family left. And his family left and went down into Africa and across, and eventually he ended up being the assistant astronomer, physician, serving Saladin. If you're familiar with Saladin, Saladin was the one that King Richard the Lionheart fought in the Third Crusade. So Moses ben Maimon, his doctor, his theologian, also writes a book which is about the complexity. How does one deal with complexity? Let's see if I can find Physician, Death, Works. So he's obviously Jewish and writing on the nature of the. In fact, I should mention the reason he was so interested in the Torah and other Jewish works is because he's also an Aristotelian. He has available Aristotle's works, and Aristotle, in criticizing Plato, has criticized not only Plato, but also those who build their philosophies on Plato. And as I explained, that the Christian religion is built on Plato, but so was the philosophical interpretation of the Jewish religion at the time. And so it's very complex. It's a very difficult problem for the Jewish people to update their beliefs to Aristotle and yet still keep their Jewish beliefs. So he explains how to do that. And it's that guide to the perplexed, here it is, that will also go with the Aristotelian works to Europe. And so what Thomas Aquinas will frequently refer to is not only the philosopher, and by the philosopher he's talking about Aristotle, but he's also going to be talking about Moses Maimonides as his support for many things he says. So they're all going to be important in the change that takes place, because this is going to be very revolutionary. Bringing Aquinas, or Aquinas bringing Aristotle's works into the church dogma is going to be a problem. And we'll work on that next class to see how he solves that kind of problem. So the quiz question is, is there a largest pizza in Eagle River, right? You can play with that one. Who was the fool? That's another interesting question. But Thomas Aquinas. And what are we going to be looking at? The Summa. There's two main summae. The one is the Summa Theologica. That's the one we'll look at. The other one is the Summa Contra Gentiles. The Summa Contra Gentiles. By the way, there's a weird thing. There's I guess it's not a blog, but one of those things on the internet where they have maybe daily conversations that are referred to as the Contra Gentiles, and what they're playing on is on Aquinas. And what Contra Gentiles means, it doesn't mean against the Gentiles. It means the arguments that you use when you come upon someone who is a non-believer. So it's not like you go to war with the Gentiles. It's instead the arguments you use when you're talking to them to try to help them see the faith, right? So that's what that means. So if you're familiar with that blog or whatever it's called, what is it called when they meet like almost daily on the internet and you can go and listen to them? There's a name for that. A podcast. I guess that's it. What is that one called? I don't know if this is them or not. But it's been in the news. So this is the work that we'll be looking at next class. How are we doing? Oh, by the way, the tests, I haven't finished grading all the ones that people have sent me so far, but the ones I have looked at have all been good. So I'm pretty happy with that. You guys seem to be doing well. You guys have any questions for me? Be careful, it's supposed to rain. I brought an umbrella today. I don't know if that's really going to be necessary, but things could be pretty bad. And happy birthday to President George Washington. And Abraham Lincoln, whose birthday was actually the 14th, is that right?
I thought it was at the end of the week.
February? What?
I thought it was at the end of the week.
Lincoln's birthday?
Yeah.
I thought it was already. And his birthday is the same day as Darwin's birthday.
Oh, it's the 12th.
So what's fun is that in town there used to be a special celebration for Lincoln, that was usually held at the Consortium Library. And then downtown at the Barnes and Noble's bookstore, there used to be a celebration for Darwin. And it was like, well, which one do you go to? Because if you go to the Lincoln one, that establishes your conservative credits, But if you go to the one for Darwin, that means you're rather liberal, I suppose. And I remember the one year I was invited to give a speech on Darwin at the bookstore, and I used as my text Daniel Dennett's book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, which was fun. So, was today interesting, or did I bore you to death?